Hey gang, been looking forward to spend a little bit of time with you. I'm gonna go through this PowerPoint and just share some things that has to do with some of the most cutting edge research, honestly, that we have. And when I talk about emotions or the fast lane of the brain, we're talking about the ability to literally change the configuration of the brain in people that we're interacting with. And when we talk about emotions being a driving force, we're gonna get into that a little bit. But first, I want to throw a little Tupac at you if I can. And in one of Tupac's most famous poems, he said, "You would not ask a rose that grew through the concrete why it had damaged petals. On the contrary, you would relish in its tenacity, and you would love its will to seek the sun." And you know, that resonated with me when I first heard it years ago because, well, a couple of reasons. One, I was raised and my oldest sister was special needs. So I got to see on a daily basis the concrete that she was fighting through, the damaged petals that she brought to the world every single day, and the impact that certain individuals in her life, adults that were at the school or the church, had on her, and how those connections literally nourished those damaged petals and sustained her willingness to continue to seek the sun. I also worked with Title I kids and under-resourced kids through most of the time that I was in the classroom and in the gym coaching. And I saw the concrete they were fighting through. And I realized at a young age, as a young teacher, that until I helped them get their cortisol level down, until I reached them at the heart level, there would be no learning that went on. There would be no engagement or interest in what I had to say, regardless of how much might love my content. It really was getting them to the point of having their emotional state allow for their brain to take over and engage. I say all the time, you can't read a book and run from a lion at the same time. And part of what my work is when I work with teachers is to help them understand, what are the lions that your kids are running from? Do you know your lions well enough? Do you know what is causing them to be distracted when they come in your classroom, or shut down, or even buck up and act a fool? Because all of those, there's a story behind the story. And over this past year to 12, 14 months, if you think about all of the concrete that's been added to their lives, all the lions, the additional lions that they're now running from the racial unrest, the brutal murders that we've witnessed, from the political divide, and then the pandemic that has caused domestic violence to escalate, alcohol consumption to increase. Kids have literally seen their relatives be sick on ventilators and die, not be able to have funerals for them, not be able to have the normal interactions that kids have and need with their friends and activities and sports. The financial ruin that a lot of families have experienced. This has caused layers of trauma. And I don't want to undersell the impact that that has had on our kids and how that's going to impact them coming back to school. And so I really want to share this piece right here with you as far as helping with our approach as we come into the new school year in July and August. Because if we can have an entire staff that truly puts relationships before rigor, provides grace before grades, has patience before the programs, and love before lessons, the emotional state of your students is going to change, and you're going to impact them at a level that would allow their cortisol level to come down, for them to have what every human being needs, and that is to feel seen and heard and validated. And when human beings feel that, everything changes. And for a lot of these kids who have been at home on virtual learning, have had parents who have been distracted, and all the things that have been happening on the multi-layers because of what's happening in the world, there's a lot of kids who have gone day after day after day not feeling seen or heard or validated. And that's one of the things that I'm going to really encourage you as a staff to do, is talk about how can we do a more intentional job of getting those connections and having those kids feel individually that they're seen and heard. We're hardwired to connect, and that's one thing I really want y'all to remember. And so when a staff has that willingness to reach out and connect on different levels, you are influencing the neurochemical makeup of that individual. And I really want y'all to take a look at what Dr. Pert is saying. When we have our feelings change, when we go from angry to excited or happy, or go from feeling very anxious to being nurtured, all of those changes of feelings, what Dr. Pert and so many neuroscientists have been explaining over the past decade is that those emotions have different vibrations on our cells. And when we change from one feeling to another, there literally is a release, a certain release of chemicals based on the emotion and feeling that a human being has. And so when we change or help a student feel differently because of the way we treat them, because of the way they feel around us, because of the validation that we provide that every human being desperately wants, because of the connections that they feel with us, we're literally helping to change the neurobiology of that student's body. And it is then that we'll be able to help them flip the motivational on switch. When I talk about emotions or the fast lane of the brain, that's one of the things I'm really focusing on, is when we have the emotional connection with our students, it opens their brain to a willingness to learn. It literally flips the motivational on switch. And so for a lot of kids, when we haven't found the formula to have them flip on the motivational on switch, that's one of the questions I'm going to ask you. How well have you gotten to know them? How well do you know the story behind the story with their behavior? How many emotional deposits have you put in their bank account? Because I guarantee you, you touch a kid in his heart, and there's a drastic increase in their willingness to have that motivational on switch flip. And when you have students in great emotional states, everything from their motivation engagement goes up, as well as their ability to take information and store it, and their desire and ability to learn, because their higher level cognition is functioning at a higher level. When we help our kids stop running from lions, when we help them with having a different change of neurochemistry as their feelings change in our interactions with them, that's when the academic needle is going to move. I love this quote. And when I talk about feelings and emotions aren't soft skills, they're hard science, this is one of the things that I'm talking about, because we're hardwired to connect. When kids and adults are in a school or in an organization where they feel connected to each other, amazing things happen. And I'm going to ask y'all as a staff to talk about, are we interacting with kids or are we connecting with kids? And I'm going to give you an example of my own personal life about the difference in interacting and connecting. I go to the YMCA here really early in the morning, and there's a lady there named Patty, and she has done a great job at memorizing people's names. And so she calls everybody by name. But Patty is just interacting with people as they come in, because she's not connecting with them on an individual level. She says, "Good morning, Tara." And it is rote, and she doesn't make eye contact. And her enthusiasm and energy is really low. And so every time I go in, I just wish that the leadership could help her understand, you know what? Just a couple of things, if you would do intentionally, you would go from interacting with people as they come in to slinging dopamine and connecting with people. She could be a world-class dopamine slinger because she is so phenomenal at remembering names. And names are one of the things that do help release dopamine if they're done in a way where it feels like I've connected with you when you've used my name. And so that would be one of the things that I would ask you as a staff and as individuals. Am I interacting or am I connecting? You know, when I work with support staff, we talk about this. You can sling dopamine along with serving green beans in the cafeteria. That's connecting. Or you could just interact and serve green beans. And so that level of intentionality is something that has been profound in businesses all over the world. I'll share with you a couple of stories. And this one was in the 1980s, and the Scandinavian Airlines was about to go under. And they were last in some pretty important components of being a successful business. One, customer service last, dependability last, profits last. And so they brought in this expert named Jan Carlson, and they said, yeah, we need some help because we're about to go bankrupt. And so Jan spent time, yes, looking at the data from the years before. He also spent time interviewing people, going to different airports, observing, talking to the leadership, and everything else he did to be able to get a really clear view of why the Scandinavian Airlines company was about to go bankrupt and why they were last in these three really important areas. And he sat down with the leadership team after he had done his due diligence. And he said, okay, this is the deal. He said, last year, there was 10 million people that flew on Scandinavian Airlines. And he said, from the time they got dropped off at the airport until they reached their destination after flying on one of our airplanes, they had, on average, 5 interactions with somebody that had on a Scandinavian airline uniform. And he said those interactions lasted about 15 seconds. He said, so in actuality, the Scandinavian Airlines organization had 50 million opportunities to get it right or get it wrong. Had 50 million opportunities to help their their customers feel seen and heard and validated. And unfortunately, they didn't do a very good job in those 50 million opportunities to help those customers feel like they had made a good choice to fly with your organization. He said, so here's what we're going to do. He said, from now on, we're going to take those 15 seconds that we have on average with someone, and we're going to call those moments of truth. And we're going to make sure that every Scandinavian airline employee, regardless of what their title or their job is going to understand that if you've got a customer in front of you, we're going to honor those 15 seconds. We're going to take those moments of truth and do everything in our power to help that customer feel seen and heard and validated and appreciated. And everything that we do and say and our body language and our words is going to relay to that person. You are the most important person right now. How may I serve you? And that became what they set their intention to do. And in a year's time, Scandinavian Airlines went from the bottom to the top in all 3 of those categories. There's nothing miraculous about what they did. What they did is they started nurturing the opportunities to connect with their customers, and they knocked it out of the park. And as one of my good old boys in Florida said one day when he was sitting in class, I think he thought work was pretty easy because he looked up and he's like, no, Miss B, this ain't rocket surgery. And I want to go to some leaders when I'm talking to them and some teachers, and I want to grab them by the lapel and just shake the snot out of them and say, hey, This isn't rocket surgery. We got to connect. We got to sling more dopamine. We got to put more emotional deposits in these kids' bank accounts. We've got to help them feel seen and heard and validated. And when we do that, we're going to change the literal chemical makeup that is running through their bodies. And because we're feeling beings that think and not thinking beings that feel, what they feel is everything. And I'll say again, emotions and feelings are not soft skills. It's hard science. And when we as an organization begin to say, we're going to crush customer service, we're going to crush it. That's one of the things we're going to do. We might not get everything right up in here, but we are going to crush customer service. Then it becomes part of the organization's fabric in how we talk to each other and interact with each other. And everything from the top down changes. And when I saw this on the wall of a school that I was working in, I stopped and I took a picture. And you know what? I felt good when I read that. That impacted me personally. When I read that on the wall of a school, I could feel myself change as far as like, God, that's really cool. Because what that's saying is we're so committed to crushing customer service that number one, we're putting it up on the wall so that you're really clear on how committed we are. And number two, we're going to work so hard that even if you had a great opinion of us before you got here, we're going to work to make that even a better opinion when you leave. And that right there is an absolute game changer when you have that throughout the organization. One of your no matter what that I want y'all to really focus on is, as a staff, thinking about what can we do to make sure that when a parent or a student walks onto our campus, walks through that front door, walks up to the front desk secretary, walks past the custodial staff in the hallway, that they feel emotionally safe and honored and welcome. And when we're able to do that, and we're able to realize that we are changing how they feel, that's going to help with the opinion that they have and how they interact with us in what they're needing from us right then. And so I'm going to just ask y'all, spend some time talking about what does it feel like when they walk down my hallway? What does it feel like when they get off the bus and walk up to the front door? What are they experiencing? What are we doing intentionally to make sure that it's a really good experience? Because when y'all start having those conversations, well, first of all, how do you even know what it feels like? And then what can a staff do? And then what can individuals do to help be a part of that ripple effect that comes from great customer service? I saw this picture and I about cried. That's not that man's job description, but what that is a man that knows when he spends a few seconds with those sweet little babies that he's giving them a dose of dopamine. He's putting some emotional deposits in their bank account. And he's literally changing the neurochemicals that are flowing through their bodies. And those little girls are going to skip back to class and they're going to feel good about the experience. And they're going to want more of that experience because dopamine has an addictive quality. And so support staff is very, very integral in helping serve the population of kids that's being taught at any school across this nation. And sometimes we forget that the littlest of connections could be the most profound. If you've not ever seen this book, Mentors, Masters, and Mrs. McGregor, I'm going to ask that you get a copy. I've read it from front to back. The author asked people all over the nation, famous people, not famous people, to just write her a letter and talk about a moment in their educational journey that had an impact on them. And there's long letters and short letters. And there's one letter in there that was about 3 sentences long. And all it had at the bottom was 50-year-old anonymous. And I thought when I saw that, wow, a 50-year-old person stop their life long enough to send this author a letter because something happened that was so profound for them. So I don't even know if it was a male or female, but this is what the letter said. In third grade, my music teacher noticed me. She smiled at me and acknowledged that I was there. This was unlike any other teacher I had had or my parents. That feeling has stayed with me my entire life. What I'm going to ask you to do as you prepare for this next school year is to not allow that your list gets so long, that you get so entangled in all the to-dos that we miss those opportunities for little connections. Because for some kids, that time with you might be the only opportunity they have to get a dose of dopamine or be acknowledged as even being there. And it's that water on those damaged petals that give kids the determination to keep fighting through the concrete of their life and seek out the sun. I had another story I wanted to share with you. This was when one of the last in-person trainings that I did last year. And we were talking about how the unpredictability of everything, depending on your personality, really could rock people's worlds. And we were talking about the personalities where you have everything in order and you know in September what's going to happen in March, and you have everything organized and you're way on the pacing guide and everything is right in order. Well, that personality, I'm sure over the past year has just been rocked. And so I asked if anybody wanted to share anything having to do with that. And this woman raised her hand, and I was so glad she did. And she said, yeah, I'm one of those teachers. I'm one of those people. And she said, I'm very organized. I have a clear idea of what's going to happen every day. And she goes, obviously, a lot of that didn't happen. And she said, it's been very troubling. And she said, we've been virtual this whole year. And she said, I teach third grade. She said, I'm a 25-year veteran. And she said, the other day I had my kids, they were all in class. We were in the flow. We were doing whatever we were doing. And she said, one of my little third grade boys kept interrupting and wanted to let me show me and the rest of the class his new plastic dinosaur. And she said, I kept thinking in my head, just put him off until tomorrow, just put him off until tomorrow. And then the next thought that came into my head was, what's going to be different tomorrow? And she said, I finally stopped and I addressed him directly. And I said, show us that dinosaur. And she said, Tara, I watched that little boy's whole entire demeanor change in an instant. She said, I watched the energy in the class and the connections that started happening and the enthusiasm go up. And she said, that was about 2 weeks ago. And she said, it totally changed the dynamic and the feel of the class from that day forward. And she said, I am so glad I let him show us his dinosaur. And here's the crazy thing. It's the same thing with cows. They did a study in England and they wanted to know if cows cared about being connected with, if it made a difference in anything. And so for 10 months, they separated this group of cows. And in one group, they just hooked them up and milked them. And in the other group, they named them, talked to them, petted them, loved on them, asked them how their children were, thanked them for the milk, whatever else you say to cows, I don't know. But they loved those cows up for 10 months. And what you reckon happened to the milk production of those cows that got loved on? You are absolutely correct. It went up. That right there is a happy cow. That's a cow that knows it's been loved on, that's been part of. And here's the thing. I have been told, since I have shared that story, that one teacher said my grandfather was a dairy farmer and he did love on his cows all the time. He sang to his cows, he loved on them. And when my granddaddy died, the milk production of the entire group of cows dropped. And so when we're talking about the power of connections, it's across the board. whether you're a kid or a cow, it don't make no difference. So when we're talking about how can we implement what we know, I want to share a really quick story with you about Jim Sporleader. And if you've never seen Paper Tigers, I really encourage you to watch the documentary, because a film crew followed 4 or 5 of his students and him and some of his staff for an entire year. And just to give you a little backstory, Lincoln High School is in Walla Walla, Washington. And it was known across the entire community as the dumping ground for all the kids that nobody wanted. All the other schools would just kick them out and send them over to Lincoln High School. Jim Sporleader was a 25-year veteran, and he was a very my way or the highway kind of a guy. He was very legalistic when it came to, you did this, this is the punishment, and there was no gray. It was all black and white with him. Well, he got sent over to Lincoln High School to try to get a handle on things, because it was just a big old hot mess. And he said that for the first 2 years that he was just banging his head against the wall because kids were acting up. He was kicking them out. And so they'd be out for 3 days, 5 days, come back, the same thing. There was high gang situations, there was drugs, there was high A scores. It was just a really horrible situation. And he was making no gains and no progress whatsoever until he went and heard Dr. Medina speak. And Dr. Medina is a neuroscientist that talks a lot about emotions in the brain and the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and motivation and learning. And Jim heard him and realized, OMG, we've been doing it all wrong. And he realized that when a student is in pain, emotional pain, that until that emotional pain is acknowledged and that emotional safety is created, that there will be no learning. And he went back to his staff after going to that conference and hearing Dr. Medina, and he's like, yeah, we've got to change some things because we're doing it wrong. And it starts with me, and I'm acknowledging I've got a lot to learn. And so he brought experts in that talked to them about trauma-informed schools and ACEs, and learning about the backstory of kids and understanding that their misbehavior was not misbehavior, but it was stressed behavior. And some of the actions and reactions that were happening with the kids were a direct connection to the toxic chronic stress that they'd been experiencing for so many years. And they started implementing some changes. And he says in some of his talks that I've heard and in his book, that if you want to move the academic needle, that it starts with placing relationships in front of the curriculum, building relationships with kids on a very personal one-to-one level, so that they begin to, after so many emotional deposits, feel a level of emotional safety, so that you can begin to unravel some of the behavior that's getting in the way of them being able to learn and progress. And in 1 year's time, the numbers bear it out. It was a dramatic change. From top to bottom, they began to do 3 things. And I want y'all to get really, really clear and have some come to Jesus meeting with yourself and ask yourself, how am I doing on those 3 things? Because this is what they were instructed and taught and helped to realize. If I am able to do these 3 things really well, I'm going to be able to reach a whole lot more kids. And this is one of the greatest growth opportunities that I've found with a lot of educators, is number 1. And that's not taking anything personal. So you mean a kid drops the F-bomb in my class and storms out, and I'm not supposed to take it personally? Yeah, because that kid dropping an F-bomb and storming out of that class was a neurological, cortisol-driven response. Does that child need to be held accountable? Absolutely. But when we as the adults are able to understand a lot of the behavior is stress related, and that when the amygdala gets fired up, all bets are off. All bets are off. When we're able to understand something triggered the amygdala in that time frame, and it went into fight, flight, or freeze. And if we're able to take ourselves out of the equation and understand this doesn't have anything to do with me, And I'm not going to let this damage the relationship and destroy all of the emotional deposits that I've already put into that child's bank account. I'm stepping out of the equation. I'm going to deal with what I need to deal with his behavior. But right now, I'm just not going to take anything personally. And then the second thing was, I'm going to continue to model positive adult behavior. And I know that we can all have moments of cringing when we look back on a situation that we wish we could have hit the rewind button and go, wow, I did not handle that very well. Either your tone was sharp, or you made an assumption, or you reacted in a way that you wish could have had more patience and more grace and lack of judgment. And so the second thing that the staff at Lincoln High School was taught was that they were always going to model positive adult behavior. For a lot of these kids, that would be the only model that they'd seen in a positive nature. And then the third thing was to ask questions and actually listen. And Jim said that was one of the biggest areas that he had to work on, was to allow that child's cortisol level to come down, and then provide them an environment that was emotionally safe, and ask them what was going on. And some of the stories that he shares of what was shared with him as that level of trust was built was really profound. And that's where the real change started happening. And the test scores went up, and the attendance increased, and the drug use got better, and all of the different ways that the wraparound services were allowing for those kids to have that pain addressed and worked on, and allow for that to be in a very loving, nurturing, non-judgmental environment. That's when the test scores and everything else started skyrocketing. And that's why people wanted to know what in the world is happening over at Lincoln High School. So allowing for those things to be part of your journey is something I greatly encourage. Another line in the sand, another no matter what, is I want you to think about becoming a world-class dopamine slinger. And what I mean with that is what you can do to sling dopamine or get dopamine released into the bodies and the minds of your students and colleagues, because we all need it. And there's some great benefits to dopamine. One of the things that you can do is just smile. I've worked with teachers. You couldn't lay $100 bill on a table and get them to smile. I'm going to encourage you to think about, do I not smile when I'm more stressed? Because sometimes we have to have that internal conversation with ourselves and think, man, I really need to show more teeth. Or I'm betting that you've worked with some teachers that you're sitting there going, I don't even know if they have teeth. They never smile. They're just miserable. Because when a child can consistently trust what they're going to get from you, that also helps with the emotional stability and safety of a child. Now, I've got a few things listed here, and I've got a handout that's available about dopamine and what neuroscience is saying about all the great benefits. But you can see from this, from improved moods to increasing attention, and folk, good grief, this generation, they have the attention span of a gnat. So anything we can do to improve their attention and focus, I'm all about it. The cool thing with dopamine, and I really want you to hear this, when dopamine is involved in the learning process, the brain literally releases dopamine, and the dopamine is poured over or bathing the neural connections and the synapses switches. So dopamine is getting poured over the neural wiring for that piece of information that's going to get sent into long-term storage, hopefully. And when that dopamine is present, it speeds up the relaying of information, and it helps to get it into the part of the brain that's going to store it into long-term storage. That's a beautiful thing. So when I hear cranky teachers talk about, oh, all they're doing in that classroom is they play music all the time, or they're up out of their desk all the time, or I hear laughing all the time, you know what I'm thinking? Dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. Because music releases dopamine, movement releases dopamine, laughter releases dopamine. Look, I taught history a lot of years to high school students at 7:05 in the morning. Y'all think about that. There's not a teenager on the planet that wants to be awake at 7:05 in the morning. So I'm one in the hole right there. Teenagers in history. History has not been the go-to subject that kids love to go to. So I'm two in the hole before the tardy bell ever rings. Teenagers, they're thinking about sex every 5 or 6 seconds. So before the tardy bell rings, I'm 3 in the hole. I better bring something up in there other than, oh, I just love history. And what I brought up in there was, look at that last one. Dopamine has an addictive quality. I wanted kids to be addicted to what it felt like when they came to Ms. B's class. That's what I wanted. I didn't even know about dopamine back then. I didn't know about any of this because we didn't have the neuroscience to back up what I'm saying right now. But I knew that if I ever was going to flip a motivated on switch with a kid that hated history, it was going to be because of me. It was going to be about how they felt when they came into my classroom and how they felt about me. So it was on me. It was my responsibility to get them to where they liked coming to my class. And so I tell teachers all the time, it has an addictive quality. Your brain literally, when a brain gets a surge of dopamine, it makes a mental note and it literally is saying, ooh, I want some more of that. Whatever it is that released that piece of dopamine. And so dopamine has a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword because we're seeing a rise in porn addiction. We're seeing a rise in gambling addiction and video gaming addiction and social media and cell phone addiction. Yes, kids are getting addicted to their devices. All of those things are in part because every time they get a like on their Instagram account, every time they go on another level on a video game, all of those things are releasing dopamine, and the brain will seek out whatever it is that's giving them that release of dopamine. So I want teachers to be addicted to you. I want kids, to be addicted to what it feels like as their teacher. What does it feel like when they walk into your room? That's what I want for them. And that is where you'll be able to reach more kids. And that's why when I say emotions are the fast lane of the brain, that's part of it. I want you to look at this. This is an email that I got from some teachers in Tennessee after I spent quite a lot of time with them. And they got together on this group of teachers on this one hallway. And they're like, why can't we make it fun to come down the hallway? And so they put up a whiteboard and they would ask questions so they could get feedback from their kids. And one week they asked them, what kind of songs do you like? Tell us what your favorite songs are. And so they compiled this list after kids wrote up their names of their favorite songs. They compiled a list and they started playing it when kids came down the hallway. Well, what a great way for kids to feel seen and heard and validated. They're playing the song that I wrote down. And, oh, by the way, kids are getting dopamine because music's getting played. So it was a win-win all the way around. This is another example. A lady in the cafeteria. It's like, why can't I sling dopamine while I'm serving green beans? Why can't they get a little emotional deposit just because? And so she and her staff got together and started writing really cool notes on Sharpies. And here's a librarian. Think of all the kids that hate libraries and hate reading and maybe feel intimidated because they're 2 or 3 levels behind in reading. And all of a sudden you've got this really cool librarian. And she tweeted this out and tagged me on it. And she's like, hey, I'm rocking some Elton John this morning. If that doesn't sling some dopamine around, I don't know what does. That's a beautiful thing. Think how that's going to be, that emotion is going to get into that kid and how that's going to get into their brain and change how they feel about maybe libraries aren't so bad. Maybe I do want to check out a book because of what she's doing on her end to change the environment and to be a world-class dopamine slinger. Check this out. How long did it take? 10 seconds to take that selfie? All of a sudden, she's helping that little boy feel different. She's literally changing the neurochemistry in his body in that moment of time. And when you feel differently, you think differently, and you perceive differently, and you behave differently. And so those moments right there is nourishing that child on multiple levels. He's experiencing a different experience with cops, maybe. Maybe that's going to have a lifetime impact on how he views cops. So us being intentional about trying to find ways to have those interactions is crucial. So that's dopamine slinging. This, not so much. Let me go back. Dopamine, not dopamine. So one of the challenges is, how are you showing up? How are you being perceived? What are you doing to make sure that every single day you're embracing this no matter what, which is being a stabilizing force every day, not just when you feel like it, not just when you've had enough coffee, every single day. Can kids trust what they're going to get from you? That is one of the biggest growth opportunities for a lot of teachers, is the level of consistency that they bring every day. We are the chief emotional officers. When we close that car door, we have an opportunity right then to set the meter on how am I going to do impacting the emotional state of other people by the way I choose to show up. That's a choice. We get to choose that every day. We get to choose that every human interaction that we have throughout the day. It is an absolute choice. And let me ask you this, because research is very clear that leaders who have great enthusiasm have a much greater impact on those that they're leading. On an enthusiasm scale from 1 to 10, 1, you need CPR. 10, you need a Valium. So there you go. CPR, Valium. How do you do on a daily basis? And what number do you need to be at every day in order for you to be the most productive and the most impactful on those that you're leading? That's an answer for you to know. For me, I knew it had to be an 8, 9, or 10. Why? Because I was teaching history, because I was teaching teenagers, because I was teaching gang members who thought they weren't even going to live to be age 21, so didn't care about anything that I had to say. I wanted to make sure that I was the kind of leader that they wanted to follow. You know, John Maxwell says people buy into the leader before they buy into the vision. And that right there comes directly back to us and our ability to be that stabilizing force. So that's one of the questions I want to ask you is, how are you doing on a daily basis, allowing for your kids to trust that they're going to get the same thing from you? They're going to get that dopamine. They're going to get that enthusiasm and energy and positive from you every day. Part of it has to do with how well you're keeping your Zen on. And I want you to get a picture of that in your mind. And I want you to know that that's your goal every day. When you close that car door, do you have your Zen on? Are you going to be that leader? And it doesn't matter what your title is. Are you going to be that leader that's going to put a positive impact on the organization? When you close that car door, are you committed to making sure that your energy and your emotional state is going to have a positive impact on everybody that you interact with? And I'm telling you what, I've seen organizations embrace this concept in a way that totally changed the very fabric and foundation of who they were, what they stood for, and what their lines in the sand were. And I'm going to ask you to decide for yourself, what kind of chief emotional officer do I want to be? What kind of weather do I want to create? How intentional do I want to be when I'm interacting with a child, knowing that I can literally change his neurochemistry by how I help him feel around me? When I help him have a dopamine release, when I laugh with him, smile with him, when I have a positive countenance when I'm around them with my body language, and everything about me says, I'm so glad to see you. How can I serve you? That goes a long way with helping a child view their potential, school, their academic journey, all in a different way. I want to leave you with this quote I absolutely love from Peggy Milan. And she says, we never touch another so lightly that we do not leave a trace. And I'm going to ask you, you decide, what is that trace that I want to leave on every human being and every interaction that I have throughout the school day? And I'm going to ask that you commit to making sure that every person's day is better because they interacted with you. And I guarantee you the academic needle is going to move in the positive direction. Thank you so much for what y'all do every day. Be very clear on the leadership footprint that you want to put on your organization every day, and y'all go out and crush customer service. Thank you.